Welcome back to Le Podcast de Philippe. Today, we're going to do a deep dive into something that might keep some economists up at night. What would happen to the U.S. economy if Canadians just said, no more American products in tourism?
That's a good question.
We're going to look at some AI responses on this topic,
Okay.
from ChatGPT and Perplexity,
Right.
to understand the potential fallout, over a 6-month period.
Right.
And we're going to look at things like the massive trade volume between our countries
Huge. Yeah.
and the complex web of supply chains.
All right, let's get into it.
Yeah.
It's a really relevant question, particularly with some of the recent trade tensions that we've seen.
Yeah, for sure.
Both AIs were very quick to point out that the U.S. exported a staggering
Wow.
$310 to $320 billion
Goodness.
worth of goods and services to Canada in 2022.
Just that year.
Just that year.
Wow.
And that's not even counting tourism. Before the pandemic, Canadian tourism brought in over $20 billion to the U.S. every year.
Wow.
So these figures really underscore just how intertwined the two economies are.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's
And it's only 1 year, too.
exactly.
Perplexity actually cited a 2023 figure of 968 billion Canadian dollars
Wow.
in total bilateral trade.
So that's
3.6 billion Canadian dollars every single day
every day.
exchanged between the two countries.
That is a lot of money.
It's a crazy amount.
Yeah.
So,
Imagine if even a fraction of that was disrupted.
oh yeah.
So to kind of estimate the potential losses, ChatGPT explored a bunch of scenarios.
Okay.
With varying reductions in consumer purchases and tourism.
Mhm.
They range from like a 10% dip
Okay.
to a more extreme but probably unrealistic 30% reduction in purchases
Okay.
and up to 80% for tourism.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
So
Like,
pretty big range there.
yeah. They wanted to give a whole spectrum of what the potential loss could be, from moderate to very significant.
Interesting.
Perplexity took a different approach.
Oh.
They focused on a 10% reduction in Canadian imports from the U.S.
Yep.
and a 50% drop in summer tourism.
Okay.
Their estimate was a potential loss of 25 to 30 billion Canadian dollars over 6 months.
That's still pretty significant.
Yeah, that's a big chunk of change.
Yeah.
But, it's important to remember these are just estimations
Right.
based on these hypothetical scenarios.
Yeah.
The actual impact could depend on so many things.
Of course.
Consumer behavior, the availability of substitute, the duration of the boycott.
Right. Right. It's hard to say.
It's hard to say exactly what would happen.
Yeah. So a 10% drop in imports might not sound catastrophic at first,
Yeah.
but maybe if we dig into some of the details.
Yeah, I think the devil's in the details, as
Yeah.
they say.
For sure.
Because both AIs pointed out certain sectors, that would likely be hit harder than others.
I see.
For instance, ChatGPT emphasized that not everything is easily replaceable.
Okay.
Even if Canadians are, actively looking for other options.
Yeah.
Like, think about some of those really specialized parts,
Right.
like industrial components,
Okay.
pharmaceuticals.
Right.
Finding readily available replacements outside of those U.S. supply chains
Yeah.
could be a real challenge.
Yeah, for sure. So Perplexity actually highlighted the automobile and agriculture sectors
Uh-huh.
as particularly vulnerable
Makes sense.
because they're really intertwined
Yeah, deeply.
with those cross-border supply chains.
For sure.
So a slowdown or disruption in the flow of parts or produce
Yeah.
would have ripple effects
Huge ripple effects.
throughout both economies.
Absolutely.
So imagine if Canadian car manufacturers suddenly can't get essential parts from the U.S.
Yeah.
Production could halt,
Yeah.
which impacts jobs and the overall economy.
On both sides of the border.
Yeah, two-way street.
Definitely.
Same goes for agricultural products.
Right. Delays or disruptions lead to price hikes
Of course.
and shortages.
For everyone.
Yep, exactly.
So even though the initial focus might be on the U.S. losing money,
Right.
this boycott could swing right back around and hit Canada too.
Oh, absolutely. It would be like a boomerang effect.
Yeah, in ways that we wouldn't expect.
Definitely. And, Canadian businesses
That's great.
that rely on those American suppliers or
Yeah.
the ones catering to American tourists,
For sure.
they'd be facing their own issues.
Yeah, big time.
So the AIs didn't really dive into those specific Canadian consequences,
Right.
but it's definitely something to consider.
It is.
This whole scenario really forces us to think about that
Yeah.
complex web of economic ties that kind of bind our two nations together.
Yeah, for sure.
And it really highlights a crucial point.
What's that?
that economic relationships are rarely one-sided.
Right.
Actions taken in one country can have big consequences.
Yeah.
Sometimes unintended consequences for the other.
Absolutely.
And this becomes even more important now with all the recent trade tensions and the push for economic independence for a lot of countries.
Yeah, that's a good point. So the AIs have definitely given us some fascinating data and hypothetical situations to think about.
Yeah.
But ultimately,
it's hard to predict
yeah,
what a boycott would really do.
of course.
There are so many moving parts.
So many factors.
Human behavior, political decisions, global market forces.
Yeah.
All that can really shift the landscape.
Absolutely.
So, it's a reminder
Yeah.
that even with the most sophisticated models,
Yeah.
we can only go so far.
Yeah, it really highlights how interconnected the world is.
Right, like what might seem like just a local action can have these consequences.
Like
just extend
beyond borders.
far beyond national borders. Yeah.
And it kind of makes you wonder,
Yeah.
could there be some benefits for Canada if this happened?
You never know, right? Like
Yeah.
maybe this would make them focus on their own production or strengthen those trade relationships with other partners.
That's a good point.
Yeah, it's like they say
Where's that?
necessity is the mother of invention.
Right.
So maybe a disruption like this could spark some innovation, lead to some new opportunities for those Canadian businesses.
Definitely possible.
Yeah. Crises often force us
To rethink things.
to rethink things. Yeah. Change our assumptions, come up with creative solutions.
For sure.
So this whole hypothetical scenario, while a little uncomfortable to think about.
It's not fun to imagine.
No, but it's a good thought experiment,
Yeah.
Makes us consider those alternative paths and, what could happen in the future.
So this deep dive has been really interesting.
Yeah, it has.
It's fascinating
It is.
how a question that seems simple
Yeah.
can turn into this complex web of economic ties and potential consequences.
Exactly.
It's crazy.
It's a good reminder,
What's that?
that in our globalized world,
Yeah.
understanding those connections is so crucial.
Absolutely.
Whether a Canadian boycott happens or not,
Right.
what we've talked about today can help us make better decisions.
As consumers.
As consumers, as citizens, as participants in that global economy.
Well, this has been a fantastic deep dive.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me.
And to our listeners, don't forget to subscribe to Le Podcast de Philippe on YouTube.
Yeah, help us reach 1,000 subscribers today.
We'll be back soon with another thought-provoking deep dive. Until then, keep those minds curious.